Thank you all for being here today. I'm Bill Sanders, the Dean of the College of Engineering, and I'm excited and honored to be able to welcome you to today's program, a celebration of Black engineers. It's a panel that's part of the College of Engineers Week and part of Carnegie Mellon University's Black History Month programming this year. There's an impressive array of panelists that you're going to meet just a little bit later, but I want to thank all of them now for being willing to participate in this event. I'd like to start by introducing your moderator today, Dr. Alaine Allen. I'm really thrilled to be introducing her. Alaine just joined our College of Engineering as the first full-time Associate Dean for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. She joined on February 1, and I have to tell you, we're really delighted to have her with us here in the leadership of the College of Engineering. In her role, she will foster an inclusive environment and a welcoming culture to advance the college and university's mission in diversity, equity, and inclusion. She'll work closely with engineering department heads and their department DEI committees, supporting department level DEI initiatives and developing anti-racist practices. She joins us from the University of Pittsburgh Swanson School of Engineering, where she held a variety of leadership roles focusing on broadening participation in science and engineering for individuals from historically underrepresented groups. Most recently, she served as the Director of Educational Outreach and Community Engagement for that school. And she's a co-PI on the NSF Includes Alliance, STEM Pathways for Underrepresented Students to Higher Ed, also known as the PUSH Network. So we're so excited to have Alaine here to build on the college's diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives to date, and to bring her considerable experience to bear on our DEI goals in this critical role for engineering. So I'd now like to turn things over to Alaine to start the program. Thank you, Alaine, for serving as the moderator of today's panel.
Thank you, Bill, for the introduction and for welcoming me to Carnegie Mellon University. I, as Bill said, will serve as the moderator this afternoon. But before I even get started, I want to thank my colleague, Kelly McCoy, for organizing this event. She is an expert arranger, organizer, and so we're just happy to have her. As Bill mentioned, we've assembled an impressive panel. During the discussion, our panelists will share their stories about why they chose to go into the field of engineering, as well as share their personal experiences. They will also discuss what they're doing now, what they plan to do in the future, and how their engineering contributions make a difference. So before I invite the panelists to introduce themselves, I want to just share an overview of how today's program will flow. I'll start by asking the panelists some prepared questions. We have also built in some time for our audience to submit questions through the chat. And so we'll remind you as we go through the day so that you can remember to post those questions. Throughout the program, please submit your questions in the Q&A feature versus the chat. That's at the bottom of your screen, and I will direct your questions to the panelists later in the program. I'd now like to call on our panelists to briefly introduce themselves. And so panelists, and I'll call you one by one. Our first panelist is Dr. Sean Blanton. So Dr. Blanton, can you introduce yourself?
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. I'm glad to be here. Sean Blanton. I'm a professor in the Electrical and Computer Engineering Department. I also serve as the Associate Head of Research in that same department. And I'm in the interim role of Vice Provost for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion through the end of the summer. Glad to be here.
Thank you. And next, Joy Bredhauer.
Hi, my name is Joy Bredhauer. I'm a former ECE class of 90 alumnus, and I've also been a winning buggy driver. I'm here serving today because I love you guys so much in my personal capacity, but I'm also an ECE Advisory Council member as well as a NASA mission manager at the Goddard Space Flight Center for an Explorers in Heliophysics Projects mission. So I'm glad to be here. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Joy. Next, Maynard Holliday.
Good afternoon. I'm Maynard Holliday, ME class of '84. I'm currently a senior engineer at the RAND Corporation. And before that, I was a presidential appointee in the Obama administration as the senior tech advisor to the Undersecretary of Defense for Acquisition. And I'm a spacehead. I interviewed to be an astronaut a couple of times and have designed robots for hazardous environments. And happy to be with you here this afternoon.
Thank you. And now one of our extraordinary students, Ms. Fumbi Jayola.
Hi, everyone. My name is Fumbi Jayola. I'm a senior studying electrical and computer engineering, and I'm also the current president for the Carnegie Mellon National Society of Black Engineers chapter. Nice to meet everyone.
Thank you. And last but not least, Dr. Destiny Knock.
Hi, everyone. My name is Destiny Knock, and I'm an assistant professor in civil and environmental engineering, as well as engineering and public policy. Before coming to Carnegie Mellon, I did my PhD at UMass Amherst, and before that, I had stints at ExxonMobil, and I was also at the utility regulator for Northern Ireland for a little bit, so some would classify me as an energy nerd.
Thank you, everyone. We appreciate those introductions and overviews. So we're going to move on to our questions. And I'm going to direct our first question to Sean, Joy, and Fumbi. How did you decide to pursue engineering? And what are your specific disciplines and your specific discipline in that career or major? So we're going to start with Sean.
I'm going to be really short here. I decided when I was 14 years old that I was going to become an electrical engineer because my older cousin, who was probably 22, bought a brand new car as an engineer at Ford. And I said, that's the job for me.
Short and sweet. Joy?
Okay, so mine's a little bit different. I had the opportunity of being involved in a computer science club way back when computers were first being developed in high school. And I was lucky enough to be one of the few that were brought together to help teach other teachers how to use those computers. So I was involved in a little programming in high school. Actually, I decided on electrical engineering probably just before I graduated from high school. There was actually a flyer outside my physics teacher's office. And as a way of assuring that I was going to have a good life, a good chance at life, I'll put it that way, of being able to support myself and my family, I chose to go in one of several fields of engineering that were advertised at that time. And it was basically for a NASA internship. So I applied and I got that, and I've been in engineering ever since.
Fumbi?
So I actually wanted to be an aerospace engineer when I was like 9. I was watching TV and I saw planes in the air, and I was watching about crashes in the black box, and I wanted to work with planes. And then talking with my mom and my dad, I decided that we talked about it and we decided I should do something with computers to help with going into aerospace engineering. And then from there in my computer science class with my teacher, he kind of pushed me towards working with computers, and I found I had a love for that. And so I kind of started applying to colleges for computer engineering and ended up at electrical computer engineering at Carnegie Mellon. So yeah.
I'm hearing a theme here, particularly with you and Joy. So I'm going to move on to our next question. Sean, Joy, and Destiny, can you tell us about your current focus of your work? So starting off with Sean again.
Great question. My background PhD work was in the area of integrated circuit design, manufacturing. and testing. So these are the little black chips that are in your phones, your computers, televisions, cars, you name it. And what I do specifically is that when these chips are fabricated, they produce lots of data. And for the chips that fail, we use machine learning on that data to understand what are the major causes of those failures. In addition to that area, I'm also working on integrated circuit security. A little tidbit, a lot of our state-of-the-art electronics are now fabricated overseas, and there's lots of concerns about supply of those chips to the US, both for commercial and defense applications. And hardware security is now one of the most important topics in my area.
Thank you. That's very interesting. Joy, do you want to go next?
Okay, so I've migrated some years ago away from specific hands-on design, and I've been working in management. And as a result of that, a lot of the work that I've been doing, I've been responsible for, I'll say, the programmatic technical schedule and mission development of a lot of other projects. And I've had a variety of different positions along those lines since I've been working. My current focus right now, we're focused as a team on working to get a mission to launch. It's called the Imaging X-ray Polarimetry Explorer. That's actually a mission that's out of Marshall, and we have international partners. My role in that is to work with these teams to make sure their emission requirements are met, as well as the overall cost and schedule. So I'm more of a management function of interfacing these different elements to make sure they come together. On a daily basis, it's quite interesting, and actually it's quite rewarding. I've gone beyond electrical engineering, I can say, and I've worked on a platform with a lot of other subject matter experts. And I like to use the analogy of an orchestra. You know, you have to bring each piece in at a certain time, and then the breadth and depth of those areas you need to know. So in working with those different disciplines over time, we basically take a project from beginning to end, from requirements to launch. And that's rewarding, and much too lengthy here to talk about the specifics, but I can tell you that as an engineer right out of school, I'm thinking about if I were talking to my former self, you want to make sure that you get a very good hands-on understanding of whatever area it is that you're working on. And then as you mature and grow in those areas, a lot of the mission managers and such are pulled from those pools of engineers who have that experience, whether it be flight experience or other experience. So that's something you want to make sure you do. And I think Carnegie Mellon positions you well, because you're going to get a really good experience, you know, hands-on and understanding what you're doing. And then to migrate over and be inquisitive, you know, ask questions, be bold, you know, seek answers, and just work with other people, you know, as a team. We say as a team, be willing to not take no or this is the final answer, because you have a lot of challenges that come up where you don't have all the resources, and yet you have to pull things off in those conditions. So my job is about making it happen through the challenges that come up of either short schedule or a short budget, and still making it work. So that's it.
Awesome. So the current focus of my work is really focused on energy equity and sustainable energy transitions. So as a new professor, I will just let the audience know this is my first year. So my work is really guided by my PhD students. I have 6 PhD students and 6 different projects, but I'll just hit you with the highlights right now. In my group, we like to build computer models in Python and R that can help us understand where we're winning and losing in energy transitions. So this might be where we're winning and losing in air pollution emissions, water consumption, land use. How do power plant investments really give us the trade-offs on these different sustainability measures? And then the other side of this is looking at equity. So as we're moving to that renewable 100% clean energy system that we've been searching for our CO2 mitigation goals, we want to make sure that everybody can benefit from air pollution emissions reductions, job creation, as well as reducing their electricity bills. So building these computer models can help us understand how we might win and lose in energy transition and present a forward-looking analysis.
Thanks to all three of you. You've really shown why this is practical. Engineering is practical, and more people should consider how to move into that field in order to solve society's problems. And so thank you for your statements there. And I'm going to move on to our only student, Fumbi. Can you tell us why you're interested in engineering and where you see yourself headed professionally?
So I believe my interest in engineering is because I'm a problem solver. As an engineer, there's a lot of problems that you get the opportunity to find the solutions for. So right now, as a senior, about to graduate, the next thing on my list is to get a master's degree, hopefully at Carnegie Mellon, in electrical and computer engineering, and then move full time to either be a full stack developer or do some audio processing work. I have an interest in music and how people take in information through the computer, especially with all this COVID stuff. So working with audio processing signals, and then also working with software applications in the future. So yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. And we have no doubt you're going to do all those and more. So my next question is directed to Joy and Maynard. How do you feel that your engineering contributions have had an impact on society?
Okay, I'll start. So I think the most important thing is the normalization of our presence in the field. For people, companies, and society to see people of color in these roles. And when I was at CMU, there was no Sean Blanton, there was no Destiny Knock, no Black faculty in engineering. There were Black faculty on campus, but not in engineering. And so the normalization of your presence and your contributions are, I think, the most important things that you can contribute to society. I can, speak to my specific projects, but I think, overall, as a, for impact, that's the most important. And CMU is going to give you the tools for you to be excellent in what you do.
So this is Joy. I like to echo what Maynard said. I think just by virtue of us being present, be who you are. And for me, it had a lot to do with finding my own voice. I'm not someone who likes getting in front all the time and speaking, but those are skills that you must have. So I would say, push yourself out of your comfort zone. Be the best that you can be in what you do, and the rest will follow. You want to seek people who are, I'll say, allies, people who are supportive of you. For me, I believe that the contributions to society comes through us doing the best work that we have to do on an individual basis and through our teamwork, where we are. And as people begin to see that we have contributions to offer, I mean, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. I mean, the truth is there to be had. With respect to, work in my specific field, it goes without saying. I mean, NASA, people love NASA for whatever reasons they love NASA for. I mean, it's self-explanatory, but I personally chose to go there because I believe that, NASA does offer contributions to make our life better in the way of Earth science. We understand the weather and how it works and how fields grow. The science has just so many applications. There's so many different technology spin-offs that help improve our life in the way of medical areas and a lot of other things. As far as space is concerned, a lot of the technologies that were developed for space are also used to make our lives better here on Earth. So it gives meaning. Now, on a day-to-day basis, it's work, right? I mean, you get up and you go to work, and I don't wear that hat. I don't see that contribution long-term, but through getting up every day, as I did when I was in Carnegie Mellon, you have to be self-disciplined. You have to want to be engaged with others for a common purpose and a common goal and a common mission. And it's that passion, I believe, society will see us, as we perform and work with others. And that in and of itself is a force multiplying factor. I mean, I hope to encourage other people of color. I hope to encourage anyone to go into engineering. It is rewarding to make things. It's rewarding to see an idea come to fruition. And it's rewarding to see both the success and the challenges there that are to be overcome. So I'm enjoying it, and I'm hoping that others seeing this will encourage others to do the same.
Thank you. Your legacies are remarkable, and I'm glad you're just here to speak to all the people that are watching about how you're going to impact the field and then motivate them to do the same. I have a couple more questions to pose to the panelists, but before I do that, I'd like to encourage you. I see some Q&A coming in, but I want to see more questions in that Q&A spot so that we have those to go through at the end. So I'm going to pose the next question to Destiny and Maynard. What are you most passionate about with respect to engineering?
I guess I'll take it first. So I'm really passionate about the way that engineering can intersect with society. Contrary to the first panelist, I actually never wanted to be an engineer. I really wanted to be a high school math teacher, and I really wanted to go save the world one kid at a time. The high schoolers quickly scared me away to engineering. My dad was very happy about that. So typically, whenever I'm doing, I hope that it helps somebody. So right now, I have a couple of COVID projects going on where we're looking at how has energy poverty been impacted by stay-at-home measures. And now with Texas, I mean, energy poverty is really on people's minds. It's not just can you afford it, it's is it going to be reliable? Is it going to be there when you expect it to be there, especially when it's freezing outside, and even going into the summer when we have heat waves, right? A lot of elderly populations are at risk for heat strokes. And that is one thing that really gets me going in the morning. Like sometimes I wake up and I'm like, oh my God, I want to actually help somebody. I want to help a bunch of people. And I feel like engineering can really do that, and that's just one way. We also have people working on like women's health. We have another colleague of mine is looking at like transportation during COVID and looking at essential worker populations on buses, and can autonomous vehicles help reduce the risk to essential workers during this pandemic. So I really think that we're at this point where we can really use technology to make sure that at-risk populations are not the worst off members in society.
So my take on it is, engineers invent the future. Technologies like, what we're using right now to, communicate, its foundation was in, military research, because, the government and the military are able to invest in concepts and ideas that, commercial companies, because they can't see a return on investment immediately, will not invest in. So the GPS constellation, was theorized and derived and launched, for military position, navigation and timing. But we all take for granted, the GPS chips on our phone, the satellite communications that make this call possible. And then most recently, the COVID vaccine. It's a mRNA vaccine that whose technique was derived from a DARPA program. And DARPA is the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, started in the Eisenhower administration to prevent technical surprise, and it continues to innovate. And GPS, the internet, that we all enjoy, are all based on those investments. And so, and this generation, those of you listening, you are all digital natives. You can't remember a time where there wasn't a smartphone and all of this connectivity. And so you're fluent already in this technology. And what I encourage people to reflect on is, you want everybody at the table in creating, these next gen technologies, so that they don't leave us behind. And so this pandemic has laid bare, the disparities in our healthcare system, in our, internet coverage, our broadband coverage. So those are all problems that, engineers can address. And so I would encourage people to, to look at it that way.
Thank you so much. It's clear that you're both driven by your passion and your focus on the relevance of engineering, and it's inspirational. And so I'd like to follow up on that questions, and I'll go to Destiny first and then come back to Maynard. What academic or professional advice would you give to your younger self?
Okay, so I know we're supposed to keep it to 2 minutes, but if I go over, you just let me know, because my younger self, she needed a lot of help. Okay, so the first thing I would tell my younger self is that it's okay to fail. The goal in life is not to do everything right. It's to live life with no regrets, because at the end of the day, what eats us alive is not what you weren't successful at. It's what you wish you had done that you didn't do, right? So as you're going on throughout your life and you're like, okay, I'm going to just give it my all. If you're afraid of failing, my challenge to you is to just fail as big as possible. Right? You want to like go out swinging. You want to give it everything you got. That way you're going to fail above so many other people's success. Like those people that stuck in their comfort zone, that were like trying to do everything right. And you're like going out with a bang and you're like, oh man, I didn't get to where I wanted to be, but you're going to be so much farther ahead than everybody else. It's going to be ridiculously amazing how happy you're going to be knowing that you have no regrets there. And so I'm not going to lie, there are days when I'm thinking to myself, oh my gosh, I can't do this. What am I doing? What did I get myself into? Why did I tell people I could solve all the energy transition problems? And so then I would also say that your challenge for yourself is to prove yourself wrong, right? So whenever you think that you can't do something, you should make it your mission as soon as that thought pops into your head to prove yourself wrong instantly. And so if I hadn't have just like done that and gone for everything, I wouldn't have gone to Malawi. I wouldn't have gone to Ireland. Like I probably wouldn't be a professor right now. And I've done so many more things than I ever expected to do. And when I said them in a sentence, it sounds like a lot. And I'm like, wow, old Destiny was really just like going for these things. And I like, sometimes I need to learn from her. So yeah, do as much as you possibly can while you can. Don't wait for the, oh, when I have more time in the future. That's a myth. Right? You have as much time as you're ever going to have now at this point in time of your life, and you're only going to get busier. So take every opportunity that is offered to you, right? Think about it. Sometimes you're just too busy, but really think about it and try to make sure that you are just living life to the fullest. I used to be one of those people that was like, oh, when I graduate, I'm going to do so much more fun stuff. And my mom just sat me down one time and was like, your life started yesterday. It's time to start living it. And so then as you're going out there in your life and you're trying to do all your great things that all you guys are going to do, make sure you stop comparing your beginning to somebody else's middle or end. Everybody always looks better at the end. And so you just want to try to stop comparing yourself. Compare yourself to the person you want to be, right? And make sure that when you end up wherever you're going, you're happy when you get there, right? Somebody else's life is not your life, and you're the only one that's going to be able to make you happy.
Yeah, so that was great, Destiny. I can hardly say it any better. All I can say, to add to that is, have confidence, in yourself and your abilities. And as as I like to tell people, what you just described, you want, preparation to meet opportunity, so that you can step through that door. And so my career, I wanted to prepare myself to be an astronaut, right? And I wanted to get the technical background that would make me competitive, to be a member of the astronaut corps. And that happened, almost happened for me twice. And I'm here talking to you today because it didn't happen. I interviewed with the pilot and commander of Columbia. And then, fast forward, 15 or so years, President Obama is looking, to populate his administration with people who have, hybrid backgrounds, both government and industry. And after I left Carnegie Mellon, went to a national lab out here in California where I am, spent, some years there, but then went to Silicon Valley for over a decade. And, and I had that hybrid background. And so when the opportunity presented itself, I was able to step through. And so as Destiny said, don't, take anything off the table. Go for these things when opportunity presents itself, and if the door opens for you, step through it. So I'll stop there.
Sorry, one thing I want to add. When you do step through that door, don't let people make you feel like you didn't deserve to step through that door, right? Because everybody's like, there are some people that will be jealous and you just don't want to let that get to you.
Thanks to both of you. I think that's solid advice that students and adults could all apply in their lives. And so thank you. I'm going to now go to the Q&A and pose a couple of questions. And I'm going to work with my colleague Kelly to collect those questions. So before I actually look at that, I want to ask Maynard, do you have anything else to share? I know that you've had a pretty exciting career. Is there any additional information you'd like to share about that?
Well, again, just, be prepared to, step through, these doors of opportunity when they open. And if you, as Destiny just said, don't have, imposter syndrome or have people, try to tear you down and say, hey, you're not supposed to be there. And what I tell students, all the time, and my own children is, you wouldn't be in these situations or being asked, be in, these universities or these jobs if they didn't think or know for sure that you could do the work. And so you've checked the boxes, you've put in the work, and just build on that. And so in my own career, there's been headwinds, and all of us on this panel can speak to the doubts. When you walk in a room, you can't unzip. When any of us walk in a room, the first thing people see is your color, and then for our female colleagues, it's their gender, and so people have to work through their conscious and unconscious bias when dealing with us, and we have to be often more prepared and than everybody else in the room, and so some of you on this call may have already experienced that, but that has been a constant throughout my career, and you just have to recognize that and deal with it, but don't let it hold you back, because you don't get to these places and to sit in these spaces if you're not qualified and know what we're talking about. So thanks for letting me elaborate further.
You're welcome, and that's great advice. Thank you for sharing it. I have some questions. So the first question is, for those who attended Carnegie Mellon, what was your most important experience that prepared you for the workforce in your CMU environment? So that's Joy and Maynard, and then Fumbi.
Joy, go ahead.
Thanks, Maynard. So actually, I would say my Carnegie Mellon experience, the whole experience prepared me for my career. I mean, in my opinion, the ability to be self-disciplined, to be studious, to know how to prioritize your schedule for what's important and when, a lot of those just key factors in just going to class and going through your normal duties helped. I also learned a lot through things that weren't directly through my studies that are invaluable. On Spirit Buggy, there's the teamwork, working with others for a common goal. Don't underestimate what Buggy did or can do for you in that regard. just teaming and management and relationship building. There are a lot of, side traits that go along that actually help you with that. I'll also say I was a resident assistant while I was at Carnegie Mellon, as well as having worked in the music library and getting affiliated with a lot of other things while I was on campus. But I would say probably the best thing that happened to me at Carnegie Mellon was learning to believe in myself. Grassroots. Yeah, I had the doubts. I come from very humble beginnings. No one from my city, town, high school had gone to a school, like Carnegie Mellon. So I didn't take on the labels. I didn't let somebody put me in a box because of what they saw. I don't like labels because they tend to limit people, or people use labels to limit others. I'll put it that way. And so I will say, I know I can work my way out of a wet paper bag or two or three. And I would just say that's the ability to kind of buckle down, take on a problem, define a problem, just the whole problem solving philosophy is what you need for life, not just a career. If you're able to master that and understand yourself and what it takes you to learn those things, like at NASA, I didn't know I was going to do any of the jobs that I ever was given to do. And I like saying you're going to asking me to do what? I had no clue of what these jobs were when I took them on. But the ability to listen, understand, break it down, work with others, define the resources, and manage that, you're learning the tools and skills you need to take on any challenge. So I think that's far more valuable than any one specific item, because you will do a job and move on and you'll have a different task to do. But the ability to approach a problem and be able to troubleshoot and understand and believe in yourself. And I'm not saying I don't have any doubts, but I have the ability to self-correct, and I think Carnegie Mellon helped me in that regard. My daily work, my parents, my support system, my faith. There are a lot of elements that go in there, and never underestimate the necessity to recharge your batteries. Carnegie Mellon taught me that I needed to take a breather from time to time and regroup. I transferred out of engineering for a semester. Wasn't quite sure that that's what I wanted to do. And I had the ability to sit a semester out in the humanities area before I decided to come back. So that was an internal thought process that I had to go through. But I will say that entire suite of activities prepared me to take on the challenges that I needed to take on coming out of college, period. And if you're able to do that, you're ready to take on the world. So that's what I have to offer. Thank you.
Thank you. Maynard, can you share, please?
Yeah, just briefly, so the one anecdote I'll share just to add to what Joyce said is, you're getting a world-class education at Carnegie Mellon. You're working really hard. When I came out to the West Coast, I was fortunate enough to get a scholarship to go to Stanford, and my advisor at Stanford was a Carnegie Mellon graduate, and what he told me was, "You're not going to have any problem here." And I was like, well, why? Stanford. And he was like, "No, you went to CMU, you know how to work hard." And so it wasn't because Stanford was easy. It was that CMU had raised my game to the point where he was right. I did just fine, honor student and all that. But, and so I felt, as Joy just, emphasized, my problem solving ability was, and still is, the number one takeaway from my my CMU education.
Sounds like that was very beneficiary for both of you. So thank you for sharing that. I'm going to go to Sean Blanton for our next question. He's just been a leader in the DEI space at Carnegie Mellon for a while. And so, Sean, can you share some of the initiatives that promote equity, diversity, and inclusion within the college that you've even developed over the years?
I'd be glad to, Alaine. there's a number of things I could talk about, but I'll talk about the college's emphasis on diversifying both our faculty and our graduate student population. And here's a little bit of background. A few years back, we checked the numbers and we found that we were doing quite well with our undergrad population. We were 22 underrepresented. So students of color, 22%, and that's higher than our peer institutions. But if you move from that, again, a few years ago to our graduate student population, we went from 22% down to 2%. So a 10x difference between undergrad population and graduate population in terms of diversity. And we have the same type of numbers in the faculty. So as Maynard mentioned that there were no faculty in engineering of color when he was here just a few years ago, there was one or two. So when one left, it went from 2% to 1% or whatever that small number was. So we decided to proactively go after students from diverse backgrounds. And so the big change in our thinking was, yes, we're Carnegie Mellon, we're ranked very high. We're no longer gonna just expect people to show up at our front door. So just like Duke basketball, Alabama football, they're great in their sports, but they don't sit back and wait for all-American high school athletes to show up to their door. They recruit. And that's what we've been doing as well. We go to places where these students are and we recruit. And as a result, our numbers in the graduate program have dramatically shot up. I think we're, depending on how you count, it's in 20% in that area. And we've done very well with faculty hires. In the last 2 cycles, we've hired 5 faculty of color. Destiny was one of them. And I wouldn't be surprised this year, based on what I've seen, that we'll hire another 5 faculty of color. And this is unprecedented, especially out of that 5, we've hired 2 African-American females in the area of engineering. And there's no stopping our trajectory. So having this new focus on recruiting instead of just waiting has really changed what's happening around here. And I'll say one last thing. Bill Sanders as dean has been here 1 year, and it's not all about numbers, but it's also about belonging and inclusiveness. And with the hire of Alaine and a new diversity, equity, inclusion plan for the college, there's going to be, under Bill's leadership, an establishment of an environment where people can be successful. So there's a lot of good things happening in the College of Engineering and across the university as well that I could talk about for another half hour, but I'll stop here. Thanks, Alaine.
Thank you, Sean. I want to direct the next question to Fumbi. And I'm going to change what's here just a little bit. When did you realize engineering is my place and this is where I belong?
I would say I kind of realized after my first internship. So I was lucky enough to have an internship my freshman year in college. And I worked in Iowa for a while, and the team I worked in, I was the only female and the only Black person on the team. So it was very uncomfortable for at least the first month, just trying to navigate the kind of work that they did, and also being as a first year, again, an internship. It was unprecedented. So I felt like I had imposter syndrome. I felt like I didn't belong in that space. But after working there and then coming back to school and talking to my family and talking to my friends, there was this extra push from everyone around me that you deserve to be where you are and you are good at what you do. And so I started taking on classes that I liked within engineering. So that's when I started doing my software engineering and web application stuff. And that's when I felt like this is where I belong. And even if there are not that many people that look like me, I can be one of the many and show to everyone else or all the females after me that it is possible to go after your passion, and it's possible to fit in an environment that's male dominated and not a lot of Black people are in. So yeah, that's kind of when I figured it out.
You said, I'm going to own my space, right? I want to go to Maynard with a question from Herb Massey, and I'm going to combine it. So Herb Massey is a mechanical engineering 1970 graduate. So he has a couple of questions. One, Maynard, what drove you to RAND? Like what made you interested in RAND? And then he also lumped in there, how were you received at your company? So if you can respond to both of those things, that'll be great.
I'll take that first question about how I ended up at RAND. And so, after the Obama administration, I was looking to, so let me back up. In my role, and I'll answer a question that maybe hasn't, about to be asked, what am I most proud of in my career? And what I'm most proud of is serving the first African-American president, hands down, period, full stop. But after that experience, why I joined RAND was I could, and the problems I saw and worked on at the Pentagon, because I had all what we call the tickets, the clearances, I got to see everything. So my aperture was wide open. And so I wanted to continue to be able to work on those problems and have an organization that allowed me to maintain my clearances, my tickets, so to speak. And so that's why I joined RAND. And they also accommodated the fact that I wanted to go back home, leave Washington, come back to the Silicon Valley, which is where I am. And so that's why I joined RAND, because RAND is the think tank for the Air Force, the Secretary of Defense, the Army, Department of Homeland Security. So we have a broad portfolio. And then what was the second question?
How are you received at the various?
Oh, yeah. So again, you're, sometimes, most of the time, the only person in the room of color. And so you're received, with skepticism, prove to me, how did you get here? And, it's subtle and sometimes it's overt. When I first joined the Lawrence Livermore Lab, which I joined after, leaving Carnegie Mellon. People would throw problems on my desk, solve this, do this calculation, and, kind of, the show me. And then, when you walk into a room, especially when I was at the Pentagon, I was the only, person of color in so many meetings. But to be fair, that was the most meritocratic institution I've ever worked at. And so, but on the civilian technical side, not so much. But on the uniform side, for sure, there was, women of color, Black men, and and now you have an African-American Sec Def. And so, so those are things you just, I won't say you harden yourself, but you begin to expect it, and you deal with it by just, being the smartest person in the room, and and I'd frame it, I'd say, be the most prepared person in the room.
Thank you. I'm going to ask Destiny if you want to answer that question as well.
Yeah, so one of the things that I would like to discuss is maybe something we don't hear a lot about is like harassment. So one of the things that almost scared me away from engineering was I had a really bad experience at my ExxonMobil, at my time in ExxonMobil. I was singled out by one of the interns who apparently really wanted to date a Black woman, made me feel very unsafe, and then nobody believed me at all. And that actually was, it didn't matter if I was the smartest person in the room, my boss always thought I was behind. I became really depressed. And so one thing I do want to tell some of our students in the audience is, I know that you're dealing with a lot of things here, and sometimes you think you're going to find this like perfect place, but if it turns out to not be perfect, leave, and you should quit. That is advice that my mother gave me, so that I don't give your life to a company that doesn't value you. And that is one reason why I did not go into industry, and I am not there to this day. And I bounced around at so many different internships because of that bad experience. And then I became hyper aware of, being a woman in a male-dominated field, being a minority woman in a male-dominated field, and just making sure that you do find those allies. If one person does not believe you, that doesn't mean that everybody won't believe you. And I should have actually gone to my supervisor earlier, but I tested it out with the other interns and and it didn't go well. And so that's probably one of the reasons why I did end up at Carnegie Mellon, because when I came here, I felt like people not only valued me as like a scholar in my work, but they also understood that sometimes minorities do go through different struggles. Sometimes women go through different struggles, and recognizing the struggles of different groups was one thing that I really liked about Carnegie Mellon.
But you can't hear me. Thank you, Destiny. So I'm going to ask another question that comes from my colleague, Jonathan Mellon, but I think it connects well with your responses. Amidst the headwinds, how have you identified and cultivated mentors and allies in your careers? And I'm going to start with Dr. Blanton and go through, ask all of you that. So how have you identified and cultivated mentors and allies in your career?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And the short answer is that I did not. There wasn't a purposeful decision. I just didn't know what that was or how it would help. And so, you know, we talked quite a bit about being the only one in the room. Imagine being at a college where you can count the number of students of color on two hands. And that was my experience. And I don't regret that experience because it taught me to be self-sufficient. So when I ended up in other places, the person in the room, you can imagine I travel all around the world, China, Japan, Singapore, and there's not many Black people in Singapore, right? And I'm able to navigate those spaces because of that sort of self-sufficiency I've developed. But I do wonder how much further I could have been along in this space if I had allies and mentors that could have explained to me how to interpret, the things I was experiencing and seeing.
Interesting you say that. I know a very wise man who has an engineering background, and he said, if you don't have a mentor, be a mentor. If you don't have an ally, be an ally. And so I think you lived up to that in what you just explained. Sombi, can you respond to that question?
Yes, so I would say I've been lucky enough. I joined NSBE, the National Society of Black Engineers, my first year in college. And from then on, I've had mentors like upperclassmen who's been able to assist me and help me find internships so I could perfect my skills. And then going on to my internships, I've worked with really good managers who I'm still in contact with till today, who I can have conversations with, and they can help me figure out where I want to be. So taking on that master's degree was a conversation I had with a few managers, and that I've made my mentors to help me figure out where I want to go professionally. So far, I think just having the experience of NSBE has been the greatest thing for me and the greatest blessing I've gotten so far in college. And that has helped me grow professionally and academically and as a person. So.
Thank you, Fumbi. And Joy, I'm going to ask you to answer that question, then I'll move on to the next question.
Could you repeat the question, please?
Yes. How have you cultivated mentors or allies in your career?
So I believe at first it was unintentional in that, say at the beginning of my career when I had certain tasks to do, outside of having the skill set, there are certain procedures or processes, I guess, depending on the organization that you're working on. And I kind of sought out those people who were already working in the area to ask questions. So I'll call them situational mentors, if you will. And they were very helpful. For those who weren't helpful, I say that there's always another way of getting the work done. So my advice to be, if you have difficulties, always seek out someone else or do the research on your own. But then I think I was very blessed and fortunate in that as I was going through my career, I actually stumbled into participating in a couple of employee surveys. And in the course of doing so, I had the ability to engage. And I'll say that, things aren't always perfect. You always have to deal with certain things. Obviously, when I saw limitations, I'll put it this way, when I saw that there were what were perceived limitations in the work environment, I did have the choice to leave or move on, but I decided to engage. And what does that mean? In addition to my normal work, I took on becoming a member of the advisory committees that we had. There was like Black History Club, African American Advisory Committee, Women's Advisory Committee. I, at one point, went on a guest observer trip for former Vice President Al Gore's diversity task force. So I engaged outside of my normal work in trying to make things better. So in the course of doing that, I got associated with other people who were of like minds who wanted to be supportive. And in that space, I found a way to engage and help lift up other, help to lift barriers, start working within the workforce to move some of the barriers or to engage with managers on what some of the problems were. So outside of work, tried to do some of those things. And in the course of that, I also engaged in becoming part of an accelerated management program. And I think that helped me because then I had the opportunity to go through a course of study within the workforce for management training. And I sought mentors out in that space. Now, that being said, I would honestly say that I have had the ability and been blessed by the fortune of those who've contributed to me, reinvested in me, their time. When I went to them and asked for questions, and it wasn't necessarily, can you be my mentor? And this is what you need to do. It wasn't that at all. It was maybe, sometimes it was one call, sometimes it was a couple of calls. Sometimes it may have stretched over a few months. And in other cases, it may be people I've engaged with on different projects or work. So I will say, take that formal mentor out of your mind, if you will, and you have to ask yourself, what is my end goal? What do I want to be mentored about? Is it specifically about work? Is it work-life balance? Is it career advancement or professional studies? And then make up your mind on finding someone who is willing to invest in you as a person, because it's not always about, black and white. It's got to be about this business, because you as a whole person need to know that there are other things that you need in order to be a well-rounded person. And those people can help you do that.
Sounds like the response that Dr. Blanton gave in terms of him becoming the mentor. So we are actually, I'm so sorry, but we are right at time. And so if we did not address your questions, you can share them. We'll share them with our panelists and get some responses and send them out to you. I'd like to thank our panelists for their contributions, their candor, their insight, their great advice in moving you through the process. Like I said earlier, these are great people to get to know. And so heed the advice that they shared with you. I'd also like to thank our audience today for being here and participating and engaging and sharing the questions. It's been a pleasure being the moderator. Thank you, Dean Sanders, and thank you, Kelly, for all the work that you've done in this. And so thank you very much for attending, everyone.